Welcome to episode 146 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined, as always, by my co-host, Dalton Willie. Sorry about that, Dalton. I was laughing too hard at the Van Pelt tweet on Twitter already before we got started to get the back screen stage off the stage. How you doing?
I've spent a week, well, not a week, since Saturday, in remorse that my trusted co-host simply will not admit that he gaslighted me for an entire show when we talked about the AFC and NFC South.
Okay, entire show is more like about 3 minutes of one show.
We probably spent spiral.
We probably spent more time talking about it at the end of last week's show. So for anyone who hasn't listened to all two of those shows plus this one, I, as a potentially pro Ramondre Stevenson point, mentioned that the Patriots have Alex Van Pelt as their OC, who was the Browns OC last year. Dalton found out on last week's show that he was fired from the Browns. Now, for the third week in a row, we are back with Alex Van Pelt talk. This time to lead it off, I just wanted to clear the air that he was fired, but Albert Breer went on the radio and said basically he was fired because ownership was mad that Deshaun Watson's still bad. Like he was, and basically said their owners probably didn't realize he was like the glue for them and kind of held their offense together. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in New England and Cleveland. But this is not a bad OC that got fired. This is a good OC who Deshaun Watson got fired.
Alex Van Pelt's agent spoke to Albert Breer and got a little media tour going. And if you can't fix Deshaun Watson, I don't say you fix Jacoby Brissett and Drake May.
Well, Jacoby Brissett, maybe Drake May, TBD. But that's all of the AFC East talk I think I can muster today. Dalton, we've got two very fun divisions to preview today. The AFC and NFC West. And, you know, kind of as promised, we saved the Chiefs for literally the last possible time that we could have as much clarity on the receiver room as possible. They will be the last team we talk about today, like just in case something happens in the next hour. You never know. But let's start it off in the NFC West, and we'll start it with the reigning divisional champs, Super Bowl runner-ups, and that is obviously the San Francisco 49ers. Dalton, what is your storyline that you're watching for the 49ers this year?
Yeah, I kept mine pretty general here, and I just wanted to know who emerges behind Debo and Brandon Ayuk. I think it's an important storyline going into the season and then going into next season, where the production's going to get heavily debated because I think we both agree both those guys won't be there next year. One of them probably will be, but there's going to be a wide open spot for that wide receiver 2 position, and it's a highly valuable position in San Francisco. Just to give you an idea of it, they're one of 3 teams to have 4 players over 1,000 yards since 2000. So very rare for a team to do that. Obviously, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey all did that last year. And that supporting cast and Kyle Shanahan's playbook is very profitable. So their EPA per play since Brock Purdy took over is first in the NFL. Their yards per play is at 6.3, which is first. And their TD drive rate is at 32%, which is first. It is the most profitable offense to invest in. And knowing the history of Deebo and Kittle especially, there's opportunity for somebody to step into a backup role and take some real big snaps away from people if they're hurt and score you some week-winning points and have some week-winning upside. And that really comes down to Jacob Cowing and Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is the odds-on favorite for us to go out there and do super well because he was a first-round draft pick. He had a good pedigree. A lot of people loved him. The thing is, Jacob Cowing kind of fits the Deebo role really well already. Jacob Cowing was a Yakli over at Arizona when he was in college. He was second in the FBS in yards after the catch. He was incredibly efficient on a per-route basis and was really good at it. So while I'm still betting on Pearsall, I think that there's a good argument to be made that there at least should be some room there for Jacob Cowing to end up being the fantasy producer in that offense.
Yeah, and I guess I haven't checked back in with the Pearsall news because it's just kind of an afterthought, but I know he's had some injury
Yeah,
stuff pop up. He's on the pup right now.
I think he got pulled off it and he's been practicing, but I haven't seen any camp highlights. Big deals, camp highlights.
Yeah, I guess my question for you would be, if somebody does actually emerge in that role, does it really matter at all to you for fantasy this year, or is this like a purely we know what this offense is? I'm just kind of mining for things that I can learn about them for next year, or if one of these guys were to go down.
Well, I think it's two parts. One, like you want to have, it's better to accumulate your knowledge for the next season in the season because, and we talked about this often, looking at into season results sometimes skews important things like who had boom weeks. Like we've talked about George Pickens, a prime example, where he had a bunch of duds and then he had a 40-point week and propped him up to like wide receiver 26. So you want to, if we get to the end of the season and Pearsall finishes, let's just make a number up in like 90 fantasy points and Cowing finishes with 80, but Cowings came on 4 or 5 games where he had big plays, then you're probably going to weight the Pearsall more importantly. But secondly, big concern of mine is if Juwan Jennings comes out and is taking the wide receiver 3 snaps when they run those sets all season long, that's going to be an alarm bell for both those guys. And secondly, like, does this offense change a little bit? I mean, is there an opening like week 1 if they run more 11 personnel, which historically Shanahan doesn't do, then both these guys are going to be on waiver wires in your redraft league, and there's a really high opportunity for you to capitalize on it, even if they have a bad week. If they're running 70% 11 personnel and Pearsall's the third wide receiver, there's a really good chance Pearsall can finish in the top 40 wide receivers and have you some good weeks.
Yep. No, and you're talking about this offense and, being so efficient and so good and will it change? And that kind of ties in with mine, which is just, I'm looking at Brock Purdy, and really for me, it's just, can he replicate his 2023 season or come, relatively close? Because he was unbelievably efficient last year. First in EPA per dropback, completion percentage over expected, passer rating, and yards per pass attempt last year. He was the QB6 in fantasy. Obviously, he doesn't run very much, if at all. So even with as efficient as he was, how good of a passer he was, how many touchdowns he threw, it was only, I say only, QB6 is still very good, but he's not going to be a QB 2 or 3 type of season, most likely. So that's not something we're hoping for. But right now he's going as the QB 11. And I mean, this offense, you said it, has just been a wagon ever since he took over in the back half of 2022. And I mean, really, yes, it's important because if you can get the QB 11 and he ends up as the QB 7, you feel good about that. But also, what matters more is the guys around him. Like last year, CMC is the running back 1, Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 9, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver 12, and George Kittle, tight end 4. If he's able to prop all those guys up again, which we're ranking them all he's going to prop them up at least pretty close to that, that's a very important storyline, obviously, for fantasy. And he has to do it on very low volume. He only got more than 35 pass attempts one time in 16 starts last season. And that's obviously because Kyle Shanahan, number 1, likes to run the ball, and number 2, has Christian McCaffrey to hand the ball to on his team. So, of course, it makes sense to play that way. They were awesome that way, all that's good and well. But you look at Purdy's touchdown percentage last year, I didn't even really realize he had a 7% touchdown percentage passing the ball last year. And then on a much smaller sample in 2022, it was clear up at 7.6. Just to put that into some context, Patrick Mahomes has 1 year in his career above that mark. That was the 50 touchdown MVP season in 2018, where he had an 8.6% passing touchdown rate. Josh Allen's career best is 6.2. Dak Prescott's career best is 6.1. Joe Burrow's career best is 6.5. And then you look at someone like Aaron Rodgers, who's been at 9% twice, and then at 7 and 7.1 another 2 times. And that's it for his career around that number. So he was just freakishly efficient. And if the volume is the same, can he be as efficient as he was last year or close? And just can he be as good to make sure that those guys all eat the way we want them to?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'll say there is I think it's closer to a product of Kyle Shanahan. I think historically,
Already some credit too.
Yeah, but I think historically his quarterbacks have run hot with their touchdown rate, going back to like Atlanta with Kirk when they played in the Super Bowl. Going as far back to the Washington Commanders when he had Robert Griffin III. Those quarterbacks definitely ran hot when it came to their touchdown to interception ratio and the amount of touchdown passes they had. Just to add to a little bit of your concern with Brock Purdy, they were really healthy last year for a group of personnel going into this season. We've gotten older when you like the additions of George Kittle and Deebo Samuel are both two players like who have had injury problems in their past. CMC, if he wasn't a superhero in fantasy, there would be a lot more conversation around him getting that up there in age. And if they don't run hot with that, and more importantly, if Trent Williams, who's 36 years old and the premier pass protector for them, like can Brock Purdy elevate that offense without premier weapons at almost every position?
Yeah, and Trent Williams and Deebo both missed time last year around the same time, and their offense dipped a little bit in that stretch. But I don't want to ding Purdy too much for that because that's obviously going to happen. You miss good players, like your offense is going to take a dip. But I also definitely hear what you're saying in that regard. And I don't even know necessarily. I don't have a firm stance on whether or not it's a concern, like I'm planting my flag on regression island for Purdy or not. But it's just something that kind of stuck out to me when I was looking at the Niners and what they did last year and thinking about what they could potentially be this year.
Yeah. But if they even regress a little bit, somebody who's being drafted highly isn't going to be doing so hot.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a question in the chat from Jimbo Slice. Does Tyler Lockett finish above JSN again this year? We will get to this question later when we get to the Seahawks. So I'll save that one for there because that is part of my topic, Dalton. All right, let's go on to the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm going to stick at the quarterback position actually here. And my storyline for the Cardinals, you're nodding your head too, is just, are we forgetting too much about Kyler Murray?
Yeah, Kyler Murray, is he underrated? So
Kyler Murray is one of 4 quarterbacks in NFL history to have averaged over 20 points per game for fantasy football in his career. Last season, when he came back from injury, and keep in mind, he came back to a team that was completely in the tank. His number one receiver, Hollywood Brown, missed, I think, like 5 of the 8 games or 5 of the 9 games, something like that. He missed like around half of the games that Kyler played last year. And outside of him, it was Trey McBride, it was Michael Wilson, and then James Conner was around for most of those games. And that was pretty much what they had. The Cardinals offense was top 10 in EPA per play in those last 9 weeks. He was QB9 if you just look at points per game last year in the games he played. And obviously, like, you have to give him just some grace period before he was coming back off of a torn ACL. He is, of course, a mobile quarterback. He's probably going to need a little bit of ramp-up time. And I think he did. I think there were a couple games at the very, very beginning where it was like, hey, he looks okay, but he just needs a little bit of time to kind of look like Kyler Murray again. And I've never been the biggest Kyler Murray like football player fan. I think he's like fine, but from a fantasy perspective, like he's never finished below quarterback 7 in points per game. I say never since his rookie season, besides last year when he was QB9 for half the season. So like when he's had a full healthy season, he has been a top 7 quarterback, and he is going like I think it's QB8 right now. It's his ADP on Fantasy Pro, so he's going about at the floor of what his production has been for almost his entire career. And obviously, you had Marvin Harrison Jr., which I certainly have concerns about him being the 15th overall player in fantasy this year, but he's going to help that offense, and he's going to have a good year. Trey McBride, another year older. James Conner, back again. Trey Benson, probably an upgrade over what they had behind James Conner last year. Like, I'm trying to think. Rondell Moore, is he still there? I'm doing that off the top of my head, or is he gone? No. Is he gone? He's Rondell in Atlanta Moore now, right?
Yes.
Rip Rondell Moore. It's what's the name of the other small recent? Greg Dortch. Greg Dortch is still around and kicking. That's who I was thinking of.
Dortch Boy Summer.
So, like, even though his passing numbers for his career have been pretty average, even if you look at like just the DeAndre Hopkins games, he's obviously just such a good rusher. Only Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Michael Vick, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Cam Newton average a higher rushing yards per game at the quarterback position. So that gives him a nice floor. If the passing kind of returns, if the passing is just solid, he's basically like a better Daniel Jones for fantasy football, where he's like not my favorite real life player, a very good fantasy player, but also way better than Daniel Jones, but just like Daniel Jones on steroids from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, we had the same topic here, so we're thinking the same way. You kind of said a lot of my points here, but some other ones I'll hit on. This is one of the most aggressive offenses on fourth down last year. They went for it a lot. They have a very offensively minded, oriented staff. I know Jonathan Gannon was the DC for Philly, but he's definitely brought a forward-thinking approach to that offense. Mm-hmm. Their EPA per rush led the NFL, even going back to before Kyler Murray was there, which really makes you wonder what it can look like with a full season of Kyler Murray. And he was thrown to duds last year, like as good and as fun as Trey McBride has been. You don't want him to be your wide receiver one. It's not what he's made to be.
And you don't want him to be your unquestioned one, which he certainly was.
There's a ton of offseason hype going around Michael Wilson right now, who had a productive rookie campaign. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. is being renowned as a universally unbreakable, unbustable prospect. For all of that being said, it is a huge addition to this offense to have a wide receiver of his caliber to give Kyler Murray that unquestioned wide receiver one in those situations. Zay Jones has had his moments in the NFL and is also around on this offense. So when you add that together along with their investments in the offensive line in this draft, they've really put together a good system for them to succeed. And it's just a little absurd. I really feel like in drafts right now, Kyler Murray shouldn't be going behind Anthony Richardson.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because I wanted to ask you that and I forgot. But I think that's exactly right. Yes.
And that's tough because I will have him ranked over, or I will have Anthony Richardson ranked over him. But from like a pure team building standpoint in most drafts, it makes more sense to invest a higher pick on Kyler Murray than it does in Anthony Richardson if you're insulating from risk, let alone like Kyler Murray has full seasons of producing what we're hoping Richardson will do. So his ADP of QB7 is a little off for me. I think he should be closer to QB6 or QB5. Like now I will say, and I will rank it this way, he definitely should be above CJ Stroud just because he has a rushing floor.
Yeah. I need to go back and look at my ranks. I don't even remember how I ranked it back in June, but if I don't have it that way, I may flip-flop that.
Yeah, so I definitely think he's being underrated in fantasy, and it's led me to draft more Trey McBride than I would like to in Underdog, but it's an easy stack option, and it always works out well that way.
And I'm sure that you've got zero Marvin Harrison Jr. shares in Underdog just because of what our opinion has been on that and how high I know he's still going in those drafts.
Got a lot of dorks though.
Okay, the LA Rams. I'll let you start this off so I don't take all of your talking points this time.
Mine is just, are we forgetting about Cooper Kupp?
Okay, that's kind of mine too, but mine is like the way I phrased it was, are we sure Puka Nacua is going to be the no-brainer top option on this team? And I swear to God, I did this like 3 days ago, and it has just been Cooper Kupp's season on Twitter since then. And it's only been like, so I think like everyone is kind of slowly thinking at like starting to kind of put pen to paper on that thought now.
Yeah, well, and when both were healthy and playing, they averaged the same yards per game, touchdown rate per game, yards per target, and average depth of target. Puka Nacua beats out Cooper Kupp by 2 yards. So the difference in the two isn't that big. And we've seen this offense support 2 top 12 wide receivers. So this isn't to say Puka Nacua is not good, because I think he's very good. But it's to say putting Cooper Kupp all the way down at wide receiver 21 in Underdog ADP seems like we're really having a misgiving on a season that he was plagued by injury. He came into the season
hamstring and ankle injuries all year, I think.
And those are the worst you could have at the wide receiver position. A little training camp report, but came out today. Matthew Stafford loves to start his practice warming up, throwing balls only at Cooper Kupp.
Well, they can't. They come straight from breakfast and do that. So
yeah, I mean, they're together all the time. So we're one season removed from Cooper Kupp winning the Triple Crown and setting like every record we've known
Yeah.
in fantasy football. And now you can get him at wide receiver 21 because he had an injury-plagued season where this offense still was really productive.
And he's old. If he's old and he has an injury history, if he were 26 and the injury history before this year was a little bit cleaner, then it would be a different story, I think.
Yeah. And he's being treated in this wide receiver 2 range with like Devontae Smith and DK Metcalf. And I don't think that's really fair. Like Malik Neighbors is one spot above him, and Malik Neighbors should be below him, despite the training camp hype around Malik Neighbors.
Yeah.
And I really am expecting a resurgence from Los Angeles offensively to be even better. Little concerning. I think it was the left guard they signed was carted off the field today. We'll know more as the weeks go on, but losing a very highly paid left guard would be bad for this Los Angeles team.
Yeah. I pulled the Puka Cooper Kupp splits from Ian Hart. It was a big difference in yards, but like only one different, like 99 targets to 100. So I don't know who's right. So I'm not even gonna say. It's always tricky when you're trying to do game by game on those, because I did the stats myself and had different numbers than Ian did. Yeah, regardless, it was not this far apart as far as like where their ADPs are now. Like the production was not that far apart. I feel confident in saying that. And it's kind of funny because we've spent, and I think rightfully so, a lot of this offseason kind of asking the question, because I think we know the answer to, or we think we do. We'll see. Can Kyren Williams do what he did last year? Because that just seems so unsustainable, and the workload especially was so unsustainable. And really no one had paid much attention to the Puka Cooper Kupp thing until, like I said, the last couple of days. It's kind of, as we've gotten some positive Cooper Kupp stuff, that's kind of caught on a little bit. But if you look at the last 4 weeks of last year, which is a very small sample, I'm not trying to like take that and say this is what it's going to be, but that was when Kupp finally, like, he had a couple games where he was back, but was kind of bad. And then he had a nice stretch to end the season. It was Kupp, wide receiver 6, and Puka, wide receiver 5. So this isn't even me saying like you got to bump Puka all the way down to 15, put Kupp at 16. It's like, Puka could still be a top 10 to 12 probably receiver. I just think maybe wide receiver 6 is a little rich in ADP. I mean, he finished at wide receiver 7, I think, last year. And so basically, in my opinion, this is that's like the 99th percentile outcome for him that you're projecting for this year. But also you've got a potentially much healthier Cooper Kupp who did show some life last season. So like, love Puka Nacua, not trying to use this as you shouldn't draft Puka Nacua. I just am feeling a little bit uneasy about the wide receiver 6 price tag on him. And kind of what I think about Kupp is like, you said 21 underdog. I think he's 22 on Fantasy Pros. I think there's almost no chance that's where he actually finishes. It's one of those guys where he's either going to be wide receiver 10 or wide receiver 48. And there's not really going to be much in between for him, I don't think, this year.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to why draft Puka Nacua in the first round when you can draft Puka Nacua in the third round. Yeah. Like they're not the same archetype, but they have the same range of outcomes. And obviously, like Nacua went in their last playoff game, went off for like 196 on 8 targets or something.
Yeah, he was 9 for 181 and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp only had 30 yards. So it was definitely a big Puka game. Kupp didn't do much in that game.
But if Kupp comes in and is fully healthy, I don't think the wide receiver 21 is an appropriate price tag.
Yep. Okay. Same page there. Let's go to Seattle. I will start this one off. And like I said earlier, we're going to look at JSN. For this one, is JSN in for a post-hype sleeper kind of August and type of season this year? He's currently the wide receiver 46 on Fantasy Pros ADP. Dalton, if you had to guess, what do you think his ADP was last season before his rookie season?
For JSN? Wide receiver 61.
He was wide receiver 38 on Fantasy Pros ADP when you go back to 2023. So I understand he didn't produce as a rookie. I mean, it wasn't like terrible, but for fantasy, it wasn't usable most weeks. He was around 600 yards. So it wasn't like a Quentin Johnston situation or something like that. But you have to keep a couple things in mind. Number one, he broke his wrist in it was like August 19th. I went back and looked. He broke his wrist, had surgery, missed like no time and played. And so was playing with a broken wrist and like a club on his hand for a little bit. So that obviously not ideal for anybody, especially a rookie trying to get acclimated. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Seahawks were 28th in 3 receiver sets in the NFL last season. They have new coaches. They're going to have a new system. Hopefully, I mean, based on who they brought in, I think they're going to run more 3 receiver sets. So, like, he got on the field some, but it was partially just an issue of, like, this guy's just not getting on the field enough. He was getting on the field like he was switching out, like he and Lockett were splitting reps or whatever, but, like, if he will be on the field more this year. Both of those guys probably will. So that's something else he has in his favor. And then he was also on a team that had the second fewest passing attempts in the NFL last season. Part of that was just how terrible they were on third downs. They could not keep any drive. They could not sustain very many drives. We talked about that with Gino a little bit a couple weeks back, how his EPA went from like very good on first and second down to one of the worst in the league on third down. I think a lot of that was offensive line play for the Seahawks, and maybe just a lack of a run game to some extent, and maybe that was partially because of the O-line. To the actual question, does Lockett finish above JSN again this year? I'd have to go. I don't really remember how I ranked it, to be honest. I think I would give that edge to Lockett right now, but it is very close, and I think it's a lot more likely this year than last year that JSN does actually supplant him. Last year, there was talk of that, like, oh, what if he does because of all the JSN hype? And that didn't really happen. But I thought JSN was good. Like, he wasn't unbelievable, but he didn't really have the chance to be. And he had 2 really good players ahead of him. Obviously, Lockett, another year older, close to the end, probably for him at this point. Like, I think people are kind of forgetting about JSN a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, my question is similar vein: is can this offense support all 3 wide receivers? Short answer I came to is yes. So to touch a bit on last year and what led to Jason's struggles, because he was the one I looked at the most for this. Their offensive line ranked 30th in the NFL in run block and pass block rate. It was a very bad offensive line, so they ran a lot of 12 personnel, which led to a lot of my boy Noah Fant not being on the field as much as I would like, and Will Dissly playing pass blocking tight end. It's neither here nor there. But that's where it starts, is he had a lower stat percentage than you would have liked to have seen from a first-round rookie. Then you add the fact that they made him into like a screen merchant when his archetype coming out of the draft was a refined route runner. Mm-hmm. But 32% of his targets came on screens last year. He's not an explosive player. Like, he's an NFL athlete. Obviously, he's explosive, but he's not the player who's going to break those away for big runs. It's simply not how he plays.
Yeah, so, and he was one of those guys coming in where it's like he's kind of one of those in the Keenan Allen type of mold where he's not that fast, but he can win down the field because he's such a refined route runner. And yeah, that's not the type of guy who I want to be throwing screen passes to that often.
Yeah, exactly. But then you go look at Ryan Grubb's offense at Washington and what they did there last year. And they ran 3 wide receiver sets on 86% of their snaps. They were a deep ball offense. They were oriented off the pass game. Not to draw like huge comparisons, but they had 3 really good wide receivers, and they made all 3 of those wide receivers productive college wide receivers. And they utilized some concepts. We'll see if they work in the NFL. Like, some of the stuff they did won't work because college is a little more gimmicky at times. But he's going to bring that pass first 3 wide receiver set offense to Seattle, which is going to have more playing time for JSN at a base minimum. And then you add the fact that, like, I love Lockett. I think he's underrated at his current
we've been pro Lockett like every year of this podcast.
Yeah. He lost a step in a lot of metrics last year. His yards per route run was a career low. His yards per target was a career low. And you put those things together, and like, it does give you the storm for JSN to come out on top. Obviously, we do need to see a little bit of improvement in that offensive line for this to be fully successful. But I think all in all, they can support those 3 guys, and they can be reliable fantasy assets, especially at their costs. DK might be the hardest to hit if they have offensive line issues, but I think Lockett and JSN are really good bangs at their ADPs.
Yep, agreed. Okay, let's move to the AFC West. We will start with the Denver Broncos. Dalton, I will let you take us away here.
I was just curious, like, what's going on in this wide receiver room?
mine is what's going on in this running back room. It's just what's it's like. I need the Brian Windhorst. What's going on in Utah drought just for Denver?
Yeah.
Like that really is what it feels like for them this training camp.
And I'm not going to say I was lazy on this one, but I didn't even bother pulling stats for these guys because it's not worth the investment. You have Cortland Sutton, who I think we could attribute a lot of his success last year, his 16 touchdowns or whatever, to Russell Wilson and him being a really good fit. You have Sean Payton, who has been very, very vocal about the fact that he hasn't been able to run his offense since he's been in Denver because of his quarterback play. So some of what we saw last year, especially with their wide receiver core, I don't think we're going to replicate to this year. And then, like, I get it's like training camp, but I saw Troy Franklin is the wide receiver 2 from one beat reporter. Another one came out and said Troy Franklin's the wide receiver 6 in this room.
Yeah, and that's how it's been in the running back room. There's been no training camp where I've seen more mixed messages about players and their standing than in Denver. And I mean,
why would they do that?
Why would you do that? Why would Denver do that? Why don't they want us to know?
Well, and I mean, I think Bo Nix is the starter.
Oh, surely.
I would think. And that this is going to be like
who else is starting? Zach Wilson? Jared Stidham?
And that this is going to be the archetypal offense we saw in New Orleans with Sean Payton because he brought in Pete Carmichael, who was fired from the New Orleans Saints. Not even going to get into how wild it is that they hired the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator. But if they're running like this slant heavy short route game, like Cortland Sutton doesn't really have a place in that. That's not his style.
Well, and like Marvin Mims is a vertical guy, too.
And Troy Franklin was a screen merchant, just like everybody at Oregon last year. So I don't know why like Tim Patrick comes to mind as the guy who might be the most suited to play this short, intermediate route game where they have 2-second passing.
It's July 31st. If he makes it to August, it'll be the first time in like 3 years.
Yeah, and we won't even talk about the fact that the guy's been injured. And then other than that, there's Josh Reynolds, who came over from Detroit. Mm-hmm. Like, this could be – I mean, it is the worst wide receiver room in the NFL. I would gamble anybody to tell me a worse one.
I mean, there's another team in this division that may give them a real run for their money. We'll get to them later.
I'd be more excited about Ladd McConkey than I would about anybody on this offense.
Probably so, but Cortland Sutton is at least proven in the NFL.
Yeah, Josh Palmer kind of is. I would put them in the same tier.
No, Sutton's had more production in the NFL than
we had 1 year, and that year tricked me multiple times. So, I mean, just at the end of the day, I really don't think I would maybe take Cortland Sutton at like, I think his ADP is like wide receiver 48. Yeah. I would maybe do that. Otherwise, like, I am not drafting any of these guys in redraft, and I'm letting somebody else deal with that headache. And I don't have a lot of hopes for this passing offense. We can talk about running backs now, where I have a little more. I think I have more clarity on the situation or comfort than I do with this wide receiver room.
Yeah, and you know it's funny because like even the running backs, I think Javonte, has he broken the top 30 yet in ADP? Like I don't know. Like
not with this news.
this team potentially, even though I don't think they're going to be some great offense, but these are the kind of situations that people bury teams before the season, and if somebody does emerge and is pretty good, like that could be a mega value for fantasy. It's just trying to figure out who in the world that's going to be. And I've been trying at running back. I really have. I've really been trying to figure out what in the hell is going on with this Denver running back room. Because like you said with the receivers, it's the same at running back. We've gotten everything from Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine might be competing for the last roster spot. We've got, this might be Audric Estime's role, the rookie that they drafted. Oh, Jaleel McLaughlin, he's the guy. He's been great all offseason. Really good in training camp. And then, like, we've gotten some pro Javonte Williams lately. Sean Payton said he looked real sharp the other day in practice. And
just today, Audric Estime had a highlight where he like hammered a safety, helmet to helmet contact. Won't talk about that, but everybody was hyped about that. How did we let Estime fall in the draft?
I saw someone, it's like, NFL can't wait to find this guy for this hit.
It's so true.
Jaylen Warren weeps.
Poor Jaylen Warren.
It's just tough because Javonte was not good last year. The efficiency was not there. The situation was obviously terrible. And also he was a year removed from a very catastrophic knee injury. So, like, not to be totally unexpected that he'd have that type of year. But at the same time, you do wish we saw a little bit more from him, some more flashes of the older Javonte, who he's never, like, been the fastest guy. That's not his game, but like he just wasn't making guys miss and that, just not the same pop that he had previously. But then on the other hand, he is clearly the most talented running back in this room if he's right. But then on the other hand, he's the only guy not handpicked by Sean Payton on this team. So it's like, what am I supposed to do with all this information? And you talked about the offense, kind of the dink and dunk that we might see. Like, that's Bo Nix, baby. You look in college last year, he was 86 out of 89 qualified Power 5 quarterbacks in average depth of target at 7.1 last year. That's obviously not to say that he's bad because of that. He may be bad for other reasons, but we'll see. But this offense is probably going to be a pretty, dumped down type of offense. And you look at Sean Payton's running back rooms historically, this is per JJ Zachariason, since 2011, they have accounted for 8 of the 20 highest running back target shares in the NFL, Sean Payton's running back rooms. Last year, they led the NFL in targets with 121. And if we could just get 2 guys and we know who they are every week and they can perform okay, there's probably going to be some value here just off of volume or volume alone, if the offense can just be decent. Like, it's just so hard because none of these guys were really particularly great last year. McLaughlin may be the closest, but like he was a change of pace guy. It's easy for him to be more efficient. And it's just like you look at Javonte's efficiency, he was negative 0.38 rushing yards below expected, 8th lowest in the league, right in between A.J. Dillon and Ezekiel Elliott. Just not where you want to be. But if we can get a bounce back from him this year, it could be a huge value outside of the top 30 running backs. So it's just like, can he be more explosive, and can we get this thing down to 2 guys instead of 3 and maybe 4? Because there's apparently an undrafted rookie who I'm forgetting his name right now. Yeah, Blake Watson, who is apparently a factor too. So
yeah, like to add to this coach speak that makes it worse, Sean Payton was like, we knew it was going to take Javonte a year. That's how this works. Mm-hmm. Came out and said that. Last year, P. Ryan and Javonte were both top 15 in targets among running backs in the NFL. So pulling a little Bo Nix stat here. Bo Nix in college was 120th in air yards attempt. Like, and he had 34% of his throws were behind the line of scrimmage. Like, mm-hmm. The guy is a short passing king. And Javonte Williams is being taken at RB33 right now. Mm-hmm. Last year, coming back from a torn ACL, he finished at RB30. And if you recall, there were conversations that Javonte may not be ready till October, early in the offseason last year, because of the nature of his. It wasn't a clean tear; it was a multi-ligament MCL, LCL, ACL tear. So, really, with this room, I'm just drafting for the skill. Javonte Williams was an early second-round pick. Javonte Williams was one of the highest forced missed tackle rate in college football. And that's usually a really good indicator. Another player in that same line was Ramondre Stevenson. Those are players you like to target in fantasy. All of those things were very poor for him last year on the other end of it. He was low at career missed tackle. He was also tackled behind the line of scrimmage on 43% of his runs, which is 5th in the NFL. So all that to be said, my shot on this room is going to be Javonte and then Jaleel late. because I think he's the second back in this offense still. I'm still trending towards P. Ryan getting cut and then Blake Bronson making the team and being a factor in that, because our favorite pre-draft talk from Matt Waldman was he really liked Blake Watson, and he definitely fits what Sean Payton wants to do. So I think he could be an annoying factor in this offense.
That would not be a lot of fun. Okay, on to the Chargers, who are equally as difficult to figure out, almost, it seems. And we're going to go from one bum-kneed running back to another in J.K. Dobbins in this backfield. And, this seems like it might be J.K. Dobbins' backfield, at least a split. Gus came back finally from his injury and worked 50-50. Regardless of whose backfield it is, whether it's Dobbins, Edwards, a split, are they going to be good enough for us to care? Because the situation, if one or both can emerge and be pretty good, especially if Dobbins can look, even if he's 60% of the old J.K. Dobbins, there is production to be had in this backfield. It's a good system, a good line, a good quarterback. This is tailor-made for a running back to be able to be below average, but above average for fantasy football because of opportunity. And Gus got paid to go there. He did have this mystery offseason surgery, and he had missed a lot of time. He just came back, I think, yesterday. You're laughing, but literally, he had offseason surgery, and we just found out about it recently.
And they won't tell us about it.
They won't tell us what it is. So, I don't know. Seems like a HIPAA violation the other way. We deserve to know.
Yeah, I mean, my storyline here was the RB battle, but we have different takes on the situation because you didn't even mention my guy.
Well, and then you have Kamani Vidal, who I know you're going to mention, but I've been listening to some Chargers beat reporters as of late, and at least in their mind, now this may end up not being correct, we'll see, but in that he has been a complete afterthought. One of their beat writers was on with Danny Carter on his show, and he was talking about the backfield and Dobbins and Edwards and he never even brought up Vidal, so they had to ask about Vidal. He's like, "Oh yeah, he's there. He's doing well. He's there too." So
he had Island today.
Just a little nervous. He's not getting the type of buzz that makes me think he's going to come in and take it over. Now we'll see. There's the opportunity for him to come in and be a factor. So maybe he will. Apparently, somehow, some way, J.K. Dobbins actually looked pretty good in practice, and he's a guy who I think he'll be one of the top guys I'm watching in the preseason if he plays at all. Now, obviously, it would be great if he could just not play and actually make it to week one and, be healthy for a little bit. But I also just really want to see how he looks, because he's obviously going outside the top 40 right now. Even if he gets named the starter and has the full support of the coaching staff, it's really hard to get too much higher than the mid 30s, just because this guy's had two of the worst injuries you can have for any athlete, especially an NFL running back, in Achilles and ACL. Now, if you listen to him, he says the Achilles was just a strained calf. We'll see about that. But
calf that kept him out an entire season.
But all I know is he is by far the most talented guy in this backfield. How good can he actually look? Can he actually get back to anything resembling the J.K. Dobbins that we saw multiple years, multiple surgeries, multiple serious injuries ago? Because you have a great quarterback, great, all the things I've said. It is right there for the taking for one of these guys. It's just are any of them going to be good enough for it to even matter? Is this going to be a situation like the Chiefs receivers last year, where it's we're searching, and eventually Rashee Rice emerged, but we're searching, and there's just no one's good enough to take the reins and to actually do anything with it.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm sure on is I'm not drafting Gus Edwards.
This is a big departure from your usual take on Gus Bus.
I really feel like if Greg Roman didn't get a job, Gus Edwards wouldn't have a job at this point in his career. Last year, he averaged a career low yards per carry at 2.9. His fantasy outcome was entirely touchdown dependent week to week. His pass blocking grade, which usually Gus Edwards has been really good at, was 41st out of 75 running backs at 55.4 last year. And he really was just getting usage in Baltimore because they had nobody else. Their next option was Justice Hill, who they don't want to use that way. And then Keaton Mitchell was even getting snaps until he got injured.
Keaton Mitchell was by far the most exciting guy in the backfield until he got injured.
That's the confidence I will say about this room is I'm not drafting Gus Edwards right now. Him and Dobbins are splitting the first team reps. I find it really hard to believe that once the rubber meets the road and this offense has to play games, that Gus Edwards is going to be a contributing factor to them winning games. I would say I'm still out of the park on J.K. Dobbins, and at ADP, I've taken a lot of him in underdog because he's an 18th round free click, and the upside case is really there.
I do think the better question with Dobbins is probably like if kind of this what we're seeing right now continues and we make it to the end of the month, he's still healthy. Maybe we never see him in preseason, so we don't know like for our own eyes how he looks, but he's healthy. He's been splitting the reps. Like he is high enough up on the depth chart. He doesn't have to play preseason. Like let's say you have to take him at running back 37. Are you clicking the J.K. Dobbins button at that point? That's the question, I think.
I would have to see who's around him. That would be my answer.
That's a real cop-out, but okay.
I mean, that is very important because I think like Tajay Spears is like RB 33 or 34 right now. So taking him, I would take Khalil Herbert over him. And I think Khalil Herbert's in the 40s. I will say I'm going to give some Kamani Vidal love here. Guy had 5 touchdowns in Troy's championship game. He was 12th in FBS in run block rate, so he's a really good pass blocker. He fits a lot of the archetypes you want from running back. He had a really good forced missed tackle rate in his collegiate career. The problem with Kamani Vidal is he didn't play at a big school. And as somebody who has led Western Kentucky to multiple college football playoffs in NCAA 2025, I can tell you, no matter how good those boys play, the NFL doesn't want them. So the fact that he even got drafted, I thought was an encouraging sign. And I've already written Gus Edwards off. We'll see if I come back to Rue that day. But I like taking the bet on the rookie who's second half of the season. Like if Dobbins just isn't healthy and just isn't there, like if he's just not as explosive and they need a little more pop in that backfield, he's the guy they look to. Because this offensive line projects to be really good.
Yeah.
Obviously, they added Joe Alt, and Chargers Twitter's in a meltdown because Malik Davis is capturing everybody's eyes. But you can't really just show pancake blocks and call it a day. And Jim Harbaugh's offenses when he was in the NFL averaged 29 pass attempts a game and 25 rush attempts, like really split attack. And they're going to run the ball. I think everybody and their mother knows they're going to run the ball. And I'm taking a lot of bets on Kamani Vidal right now, and I could be really wrong, but I really think that he's the guy I want in this backfield.
I'm less enthusiastic, but we'll see. There's definitely room for that to happen. Okay, let's go to Vegas real quick, Dalton. The Raiders, what is your storyline you're watching here?
Back to rookie running back talk. Dylan Labe. Is Dylan Labe going to be fantasy relevant? So
mine is Zamir White actually good or just in a position for volume? So we're like on the same page looking at this backfield again.
Yeah, well, the thing for me is it's twofold here. One, the Raiders defense is not going to recreate the magic they had for the second half of the season last year. I feel that they're not going to be able to have games where they run the ball 30 times for 2 reasons. One, regardless of which quarterback is starting, they're not going to be able to put up a lot of points. 2, I just don't think that Max Crosby can carry a team alone, and they're asking a ton of Max Crosby. Their defensive line outside of him is Tyree Jackson, who they drafted in the first round, who was really a disappointment last year. And their secondary has major holes in it. So it's been pretty clear so far, and this is preseason, it's training camp, things are always subject to change, but Dylan Labe is their pass catching back. He's been running with the ones. He had a 25-yard carry, the longest carry of their camp today. And he's going to be the guy who catches the ball. Zamir White didn't get a lot of passes or targets last year despite being the lead back. And we know that the quickest way to points in fantasy football in half PPR, PPR for running backs is catching the ball. fantasy
Yeah,
value.
and like you said, he did not do that down the stretch. Like he had one game with like 5 receptions, but other than that, I think it was 4 receptions in the other 3 games or something like that.
And both these quarterbacks are check down guys. Like Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell are short A-dot target guys. So Dylan Labe is also free click and underdog, so it's kind of another cop out, but I also am invested in him in all 3 dynasty leagues I'm in. So, like, I do believe in Dylan Labe. He had more receiving yards at New Hampshire. I understand it's New Hampshire. Than A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, Lad McConkey, and Xavier Legette. He had more career receiving yards. He had 1,743. And he really is like a very Austin Eckler archetype of running back, where he is undersized, he's smaller, but he does a lot of things really well. And I'm way more encouraged that he's running with the ones already than I would be if he wasn't getting any mention at training camp right now.
Dalton's here to talk to you guys about the underdog 18th round free clicks. I'm here to talk to you guys about the big time investments you may have to make. And that is Zamir White. And is he actually good, or is he just set up for volume? I think that's probably one of the more important storylines this year for fantasy football, because this is kind of the classic situation we get every year where there's somebody who, at least up to this point, has not proven to be a very good player, but is in a situation where it's, who else is there? And the thing is, we mentioned Dylan Labe, like there's always somebody else if you're not any good at the running back position. That's just always how it goes. And, you look at Zamir White last year, he played basically those last 4 weeks. 3 of those 4 games, he was above a 70% snap share, all without Josh Jacobs, obviously, to close the season. He put up, good numbers, all 4 of those, over 100 total yards 3 times. He was over 100 rushing yards in 2 of those games. But I mean, are people just not lit? Like the Raiders GM has already said they want to lean on multiple running backs. Now, will that be true? I don't know. But I feel like people are kind of putting their head in the sand with that and projecting volume for Zamir White and Zamir White only right now with this team. But like if he's good, he is obviously in a really good spot to earn volume on, what will probably not be a very good team, but still a high volume running back that he would probably be a running back too. But how involved is Dylan Labe in the passing game? Does Alexander Madison get involved at all on the early downs? And if that happens, that's probably death for all 3 of these guys, if there's 3 guys that we have to kind of care about to a certain extent. But I don't know. It's so funny because I've seen film people with Zamir White. It's like, oh, his comp is Alexander Madison, who we just learned last year in this exact same situation, kind of in Minnesota. Not really very good. And this is a guy who this coaching staff, a version of this coaching staff and now this coaching staff, they've been talking up for years since he's been there. But he was never able to get on the field basically at all until the last 4 games of last season. And I heard somebody make the point that, Josh Jacobs could have come back, but Zamir White was so good they just decided not to. It's like, no, I would be willing to bet it was probably, we know Josh Jacobs will not be in Vegas. And we know this season we have 6 wins. Let's see what we've got in this kid who's been riding the pine for 2 years. You look at a guy like Tajay Spears playing behind Derrick Henry, he still earned his way on the field in some role right away and all year last year. That is the sign of a good player, not as much so what the Zamir White experience has been the last 2 years. But young player, maybe he takes a step forward, and if he does, he'll be a nice value for fantasy. If not, like, you're going to be real sad you drafted him over a pretty good receiver, tight end, or quarterback, most likely.
Yeah, and that the bad thing for Zamir White, in my opinion, is this is a running back who needs a lot of touches to be successful, and that's kind of a Jag archetype. He's just a guy. If he finishes the year and he's getting 12 to 15 touches a game, I don't think he's going to be hitting value for you And
No, because he was getting like 27 touches a
yeah,
game or something ridiculous the last month of the season last year to do what he did, which was like running back 15.
yeah. And it's just hard for me to make a case for a team that's going to be this bad to run the ball that many times in that many games that consistently and successfully, especially when the addition of Brock Bowers makes me think they're going to want to pass the ball more. Like he's not going to block for them. Michael Mayer is still around, but Michael Mayer is also a pass catching tight end first.
Yeah, he'll catch passes some, and obviously Devontae Adams is there now. We will see if he's there in 3 months, but he's there now. Jacoby Myers, good player. Like they've got guys in the passing game.
And if he's not getting that high touch volume, he's just not going to be it. And this would have been in previous years a running back, I think, going around 3-4 at the turn. That would have been a stereotypical dead zone running back. And he just nails every single one of the roadblocks a lot of fantasy players talk themselves into on volume alone when he's not really like a standout player. I get playing behind Josh Jacobs is hard, but you're telling me Josh Jacobs didn't need spells where someone else could do work for him? They brought in Amir Abdullah and tried to make Amir Abdullah a thing for a while. Like, it's just a coaching staff that's consistent.
Still there, by the way, for right now. Still there.
Yeah. It's a coaching staff that's tried to find avenues to success and haven't found it in the running game outside of Jacobs. And Zamir White's been there for those failures.
Yep, been there and not on the field. Real quick before we move off of Vegas, do you have a preference for which quarterback you'd like to see win this job, just for the sake of everybody else that we care about on this team from a fantasy perspective? Because for me personally, I really would prefer Gardner Minshew win this job. I don't know about you.
Yeah, Gardner Minshew has shown he can run a competent offense. Aiden O'Connell against the Chiefs didn't throw a pass in the second half. Like, that was a real outcome. They won the game, and he didn't throw the ball once in the second half. And I mean, he's a fine backup. Gardner Minshew at least showed us he can elevate an offense. I know he had Shane Steichen last year, but he can at least make fantasy viable outcomes for the players on that team.
Well, this is maybe selfish of me because I'm invested in Devontae Adams, but also Devontae Adams is the guy that we care most about for fantasy on this team. He's obviously the best player, the highest drafted player, whatever. And if I know one thing about Gardner Minshew, it's that he is going to look for the best player on his offense and throw him the ball. And when you don't have a good quarterback, I want that kind of quarterback for a team for fantasy football.
Yeah, he just knows where his money's made.
Yeah.
And he's going to give it to him.
He obviously did that with Pittman last year and has, done that in years past in Jacksonville. Okay. The storyline we've been putting off, I don't have an alert that Rashee Rice is suspended for 8 weeks. So I guess we just have to do this. We have to do this and hope to God that nothing changes drastically after this conversation. But Dalton, I mean, we got to talk about the Chiefs receiver room at this point. I'm sure that's probably your storyline, right?
Yeah, I picked one because I figured we'd talk about all of them anyways. So
okay, like mine is just how in the world does this receiver room shake out? Like that's I think just the broad storyline. And do you have a guy who you're feeling good about, bad about? What's the situation here?
Well, my question was like, why didn't the fantasy community overreact to Xavier Worthy? There's just been a really measured response to the Chiefs drafting the fastest player in NFL history, and that's probably because the number of offensive busts fantasy players have dealt with on this Chiefs offense, going way back to like Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle, CEH, Sky Moore, Noah Gray for some of us. But this is the best offensive personnel grouping Kansas City has had as far as a depth level goes. Like Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, and Travis Kelce are as close as you're coming to in the Mahomes era of a successful personnel grouping. And they add Xavier Worthy, who they traded up for, and we're still drafting him in the 50s and 60s, which I think is smart. However, there have been nobody in the fantasy community is really taking a stake on this offense or on a player that they think is going to excel other than Travis Kelce. Well, I just find interesting.
It's just really hard. It's really hard to pick a guy, and that's not always how it works out. There's not, maybe all three guys are like good and they're startable for fantasy, but none of them, because it's kind of like the Cooper Kupp thing where I find it a little hard to believe that we're going to have 3 Chiefs players in between like wide receiver 35 and 45. That's kind of how they're all being ranked right now. But maybe it's like 3 Chiefs guys between wide receiver 28 and 48, like a little, make that range a little bit wider. But it's like every guy has his pros and cons. Hollywood Brown is the most proven in the NFL. He can win on all 3 levels. He is very good down the field in the deep passing game, which it seems like deep passing is going to be back for KC this year after a career low 6.8 ADOT for Mahomes last year, basically by a full yard, lowest of his career. You have Rashee Rice, who was, this is going to be a funny thing to say, but the best rookie receiver in Chiefs history, Rashee Rice. Chiefs don't win the Super Bowl if Rashee Rice can't be ready to be good as a rookie last year. And that, before the season, we were pretty dismissive of Rashee Rice like entering training camp because it's like rookie receivers just don't do it with Andy Reid. It takes some time. Like look at Sky Moore. Now look at Sky Moore, but that's another conversation. But like that was the conversation. And this dude had a really good season last year. But can he do more in this offense? Can he win more down the field? Doesn't have to be like straight pop shot, vertical shots, but can he just win like on deep intermediate stuff? Like that's how he made his money in college. We'll see if that translates to year 2 and he gets his route tree expanded, because he's not going to have to be force fed like he was last season. They're not going to have to do that, injuries aside, of course. And then you have Xavier Worthy, who, again, you said pretty much everything they traded up for. Fastest guy in NFL history, but not just a speed guy. He's a very good route runner. He's got nuance to his game. He can go win at the catch point. Like he's a guy more in the ilk of Zay Flowers than McCole Hardman, who can go up and play bigger than he is and win and play through contact and all those things. You're going to see low lights like you did today of him getting completely destroyed by Joshua Williams, a very big and good cornerback, mind you. Like he's the size of T. Higgins almost.
Hey, mind you, they were hitting him before the snap. That's illegal in the NFL. That's a flag, sir.
My guess is they were told, hey, you're going to just press coverage Xavier Worthy all day today and make his life miserable. Let's see how he responds to that. That's probably what was going on today. So, like, I think Rashee Rice is the safest. I think Hollywood Brown.
That's so funny. The guy that might.
I know. The guy, if he plays the whole season, which right now it feels like we're trending more toward a 2025 suspension. But of course, the Willie Gay situation taught us that it could happen at any point in 2024 still. Like it could. So on the field, he's the safest. That's a great point. I'm glad you said, though. Off the field, it's like, are we going to have him every week of the season? Obviously, health pending. And then Xavier Worthy is like probably the highest upside, but probably the lowest floor. Then Hollywood Brown is, I think, the best combination of ceiling and floor. But also, he's had injuries the last couple of years. So, like, all these guys have warts. All these guys have big upside. And it just makes it really hard to determine what to do in Kansas City. And I think the consensus is Hollywood, Rashee, and Worthy, probably in that order. I think I'd probably agree.
It's wide receiver 32 for Brown, 37 for Rashee, 38 for Worthy.
Wow, so Rashee and Worthy have both moved up a little bit since last I looked. And the thing I'll say for Hollywood Brown, he is proven. He's done it on multiple teams, but this is also a guy who I don't know if we've been able to see the best of him because of the situations he's been in. That sounds weird to say because he's played with a great quarterback in Lamar Jackson and a good quarterback in Kyler Murray. But this is a good stat for Ian Hartitz. Here's the catchable deep ball rate since 2019 for Hollywood Brown's teams. The Ravens are 31st at 41.5%. The Cardinals are 15th, so right about league average, 47%. And then the Chiefs are 7th at 49%. So this is going to be obviously the best situation from a quarterback perspective, but just also probably fit perspective for Hollywood. So, like, all these guys are kind of mystery boxes in their own right, and it makes it really hard to know what to do with them. But if you get it right, like, there is obviously potential for mega boom here for fantasy if you get it right, or if one of them gets hurt. And, outside of Xavier Worthy, who maybe it turns out he's just a rookie and he's not ready, although everything the Chiefs are saying, it's a lot different than usual, where it's more of, hey, there's no time for him to be eased in. He's got to get thrown in the fire. That's all of the talk coming from the Chiefs right now for him. But there's every chance that we have all three of these guys be perfectly fine for where they're drafted. Juju Smith-Schuster and Hollywood Brown on a points per game basis are both top 40 receivers in 2022. So and those guys are not as good as any of these guys. So it is possible that all three of these guys live up to price, and it's possible that one or two drastically exceed their price.
Yeah, what if this offense goes nuclear?
Which that they could. I really want to rank Mahomes 1 at quarterback. I still might make that switch because we might get a nuclear Chiefs offense this year, which we have not had, really for a couple years now.
Yeah, well, and I mean, again, it's training camp. It's been a consistent theme that every time Worthy's there, they're throwing it deep just to see what they can do. It's nice that we don't have to think about Kadarius Toney or Sky Moore.
Kadarius Toney getting a lot of playing time before he got hurt, which we don't know what the injury even is. But
that is true. At the end of the day, I do think the safest bet is Rashee Rice, and then the best moderate outcome is Hollywood Brown. But there's just a real case to be made that Xavier Worthy, looking at his collegiate production, he had a lot of those identifiers that the stats community likes. He had a very early breakout. He broke out his rookie or his freshman year at Texas. He had an average separation of 3.54, which was first in last year's class, which says a lot considering who was in that class. And some of the problems with him, he led the draft class in the highest off-target throw rate at 22.4%. The next closest was at 17.9. If you go back,
who was it? Was it Adonai Mitchell? Was it both the Texas guys?
I was going to say it very well could be AD Mitchell, because that offense did that a lot. And I mean, the biggest question is how he holds up to physicality in the NFL.
Yeah.
Biggest question for Rashee Rice is does he get suspended? And the biggest question for Hollywood Brown is how much do they want to feature him if it becomes close between Hollywood and Worthy, knowing Hollywood Brown's on a 1-year contract and Worthy's not. And
if Hollywood plays well, he's going to price himself out of KC, most likely.
Exactly. So, end of the day is to say that this offense has so many weapons. Mahomes should probably be taken higher where you have the opportunity to. And Travis Kelce is going to get a lot of favorable matchup because
he's going to have room to breathe again.
Yeah, this offense can trot out 11 personnel as much as they want now and do it successfully. And we haven't even mentioned, I know this is a deep find, but Nico Remigio last year before he got injured was somebody that this staff was very, very hopeful about being a good player. And you still have
Justin Watson. Yep. But we both decide, okay, we've gone too long. We got to at least mention Justin Watson exists.
And he's not going to be a fantasy important player, but he does do a lot of things that Kansas City wants him to do, and he does them just well enough that he can be a thorn in the side. That there's also a world where the Chiefs do decide to rotate a lot of their receivers outside of probably Hollywood Brown and Rashee Rice, where Xavier Worthy becomes a total non-factor his rookie season.
Yeah, and it's can those three guys do enough on the outside to where Justin Watson does not need to be kind of the sacrificial X, like the Marquez Valdez-Scantling, the Romeo Doubs is better than these guys, but that's kind of the Romeo Doubs role in the Green Bay offense. Just throw him on the outside and he produces.
The wind sprinter.
Yeah. And then the last thing with the Chiefs, just you talking about under the radar guys, he is not going to be a fantasy factor this year, but I'm kind of getting excited about Jared Wiley for the Chiefs.
He made Drew Tranquill mad when he had a one-handed catch down the sideline.
Yeah.
And he looks to be the new heir apparent to Travis Kelce in that role. He'll never be Travis Kelce, but he could be a good to productive tight end. But
and why he's important, I think, is that they can play 12 personnel. They can go 13, do more of the heavy sets, like they did when Jody Fortson was there. Obviously, Noah Gray being that third guy, and they were unbelievable out of those sets.
And that muddies the water more for fantasy.
Yeah.
Because if they can run any set, which we've said now almost every personnel grouping you can, if they can do those successfully and they run out different personnel sets week to week or even game to game and drive to drive, it's going to be very frustrating outcomes for everybody but like 2 players on this Chiefs team. And then Isaiah Pacheco will eat no matter what.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where we're just not going to know until the games start, because while the Chiefs do play their starters more than a lot of teams in the preseason, it is as vanilla as can be. So you're not going to actually learn anything about scheme, maybe a little bit about preference, but you're going to see, like, I remember one year, I think it was last year, where they took a deep shot to Sky Moore, and it was just for no other reason because, like, we just want to see Sky, like, we want to see what that looks like. So, like, there's going to be a lot of that. You're not going to be able to learn too much from the preseason, but the receiver situation in KC is one of the most important, if not the most important, situations to look at for fantasy, because I do think, like you said, there is potential for this offense to go nuclear, and you want to have those guys if they do, and you want to have the right guys.
Yeah, and I think having any of them coming out of a draft, you can feel pretty confident.
Yeah,
you're going to have some good shares in this offense.
Yep. Agreed. All right, Dalton, that is going to do it for episode 146 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. If you're on the YouTube, which is Half Point Per Podcast, those things are on the bottom right now. Just take a look at the old usernames. The link to all those things also in the show notes. As always, our show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of that. Leave us a 5-star review. And next week is when things really get exciting, because we've been talking storylines, but now it's time to start making some real predictions. This is where the rubber kind of meets the road for draft season. So we're excited for that. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.